Week in the textbook readings really focus on that system of federalism and support and the responsibilities of state, local, and federal. And one important point in this is command and control and communication. How do we communicate in a similar fashion so we're all saying the same thing? This is where the incident command system is really key. The National Incident Man system it ensures that there's common language and common structure that is used as it relates to response and coordinating the response. So here in Virginia, we have the Virginia Emergency Operations Center. If we have a large-scale event, hurricane, a major snowstorm, we activate the Emergency Operations Center. The Emergency Operations Center is set up consistent with Incident Command System in terms of the roles and responsibilities. If this was a major event, we could have somebody come in from California, and because we're following the same model, they can plug in, play, and take on a responsibility to support us here because they have received the same training and understanding of ICS and NIMS. So after 9/11, a lot of this was required, that in order to receive grant funding, all states and locals had to take the National Incident Management System training and ICS training in order to ensure that during these large-scale emergencies, everyone could work together in a coordinated fashion. A lot of times when we see failures in emergency, is because the coordination has failed. The coordination between the different public safety entities, the failure between state, local, and federal. And I think you saw that specifically highlighted in the video related to Hurricane Katrina. A lot of fingers being pointed between the federal government, the state, and the locals, and not enough coordination for what became a massive, massive, and deadly storm. 3,000 people dead. You see the same message echoed in 2017. Fingers pointed at FEMA, at the local governments, state governments, leadership in Puerto Rico or Texas about who's responsible and what went wrong. And a lot of times, again, it comes down to communication, expectations, and also taking responsibility for planning and having available resources on hand. So pay close attention to the major points that are identified. Again, all of the information on your syllabus could be on the final, and we'll talk about that in more detail. But it's important to know the complexities that come to responding to a disaster and some of the considerations that must be had as it relates to communication, command and control, and the different roles and responsibilities of all the whole of community partners. This week, our focus is still on response, but is focused on the threat of terrorism. And again, clearly terrorism was amped up as a focus based on the tragedies of 9/11. September 11, 2001, but terrorism has been a threat in the world for many years, centuries in fact, where individuals would target civilians and others in order to murder and kill, but also for various reasons, whether it's political, religious, etc., racial, racism, hate, etc. And so it's a unique threat that we better understood in terms of the capabilities after 9/11. So a lot of the things that we've done over the last 15 or so years, almost 20 years, have been because of the failures of 9/11. The requirement of the NIMS and ICS training, for instance, the billions of dollars that have been spent to build capabilities to prevent terrorism, the changes. We have a whole, the Department of Homeland Security was developed because of 9/11. TSA, you used to could go right up and get on your airplane and hug your family and say goodbye. Now the screening has been enhanced, and I know we all have dealt with that. So usually, again, when failure occurs, changes occurs, and this is why every time there's an incident, there's an after action event, after action report, AER, to highlight some of those failures. And then once you identify the failures, you try to close that gap. And over the last 20 years, the effort has been to close the gap. The lead agency for terrorism investigation and prevention in the United States is the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation. But again, there's been a ton of money and responsibility given out to locals and state agencies. So, for instance, here in Virginia and in many urban areas and I think every state, they have what is called a fusion center. And the fusion center is composed of mostly law enforcement here in Virginia, the state police, as well as some partner public safety agencies. And they work hand in hand with the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, to share and bring together information and intelligence related to terrorism threats. And many believe that it has been effective with sharing communications across different jurisdictions and states with the specific goal of preventing terrorism. So over the last couple of years, we would get alert or warning related to a different tactic used by terrorist organizations, and that information will be shared by the Fusion Center and then sent out to various law enforcement stakeholders on the local, state, and federal level. So it's all about information sharing. But again, there's gaps as it relates to everything. So this week I asked a question about, are we missing anything as it relates to our posture related to terrorism? We haven't had another 9/11, but we had a lot of active shooters, and we've had a rise in domestic terrorism. A lot of our focus post 9/11 was preventing Al-Qaeda and some of the foreign-born terrorist groups from the Middle East in terms of attacking us. But it has our balance of focus shifted too far to focusing just on that. There's a lot of people who says that's the case. There's actually going to be a hearing in Congress about the rising threat of white nationalism and domestic terrorism, to look at the impacts and the threats here in the country. So want to get your perspective on that. Also, there's a rising threat of a cyber attack. A cyber attack could be just as impactful and possibly as deadly as a 9/11 attack. If someone attacks our power grid and there's no power, what about the folks who are on ventilators or in the hospital who need power just to breathe and to live? What about our elderly who might be affected by the loss of power, and there might be a heat wave? So are we missing something? Do we need to focus our attention more on domestic terrorism or enhancing our cybersecurity? So I want you to think creatively based on the reading about where we are in terms of, and based on the reading as well as the movie, on where we are as a country related to our posture for the terrorist threat. I will be doing an interview with a colleague of mine, John Scrivani. He's a former New York City police officer who was on the scene at 9/11, a true hero who was trying to help his fellow men and women in law enforcement. He does know folks who died, several folks who died in the attacks, and he was a first responder there and supported response and recovery. So we'll do an interview with him to talk about both 9/11, that experience, but also Hurricane Sandy, which impacted the city of New York. I think that was probably around 2008 or so. But it was one of those major, impactful storms. It flooded the New York City metro station, damaged a lot of things. Power was out. So you get a firsthand experience based on his stories about what that experience is like, being an emergency manager, coordinating a massive disaster. I think that would be very helpful for you all, whether you go into emergency management or public safety, to hear from him. So again, everything that we talk about in the course, there's a possibility to be on the final. Again, continue to do the reading, look at the videos, and again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. All right. Thanks so much, and look forward to the next several weeks until the end of the semester. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.